So when will home prices go down? So this is something that everybody wants to know. You have buyers that are looking to buy a home, but buyers are afraid to jump into the market because the home prices have just been going up and up, and a lot of people are expecting them at some point to just go down. I mean, they just can't keep going up. So a lot of buyers are kind of waiting it out. They're looking at it and saying, well, you know, if I wait, maybe I'm just going to wait another year and see if the home prices come down. And so they're waiting for this peak, and so they're just kind of waiting it out. You have the sellers that are wanting to sell their house, but then they're just not sure about where they're going to go, what kind of house are they going to buy, how are they going to find a house. The market is so competitive, and we're seeing multiple offers. We're seeing buyers putting in contracts and not being able to get their home. I'm seeing actually agents. I've seen agents that put in 14, 15 offers and still can't get the home for their buyer. So a lot of people are getting frustrated with the market and how the home prices are going up. So a lot of people just want to know, when will the home prices go down? I think to answer this question, we need to understand a couple of things. Number one, we need to understand what are the factors that actually drive real estate prices. And number two, we need to kind of look back into history and see what's happened in the past and kind of make comparisons with now. History is always a good indicator of what's going to happen in the future. So we're going to look back at this, and we're going to take a look at some numbers. We're going to take a look at some of the home stats, the home sales from historical home sales, and make some comparisons. So if we look back in the time period between 2002 and 2006, we see that between those years, we actually had sales of 28.2 million. If you look at the time period between 2018 all the way to 2022, it actually is matching up quite a bit. In fact, for 2022, the projection is that we're going to have about 5.9 million home sales. Now, if that actually happens, we'll actually match the greatest home sale period in the U.S. in history. And so when you just look at those numbers, there's some striking similarities. You can see what happened. You can see what happened after 2006, and we go into the 2007, 2008, when it really during the Great Recession, home values just started dropping. And so what does this mean for the future? Like, where are we headed for the future? I think to kind of understand this, we really need to compare what was happening back then, what's happening now, what are the similarities, what are the differences, and really just take it from there. So if we go back into history, and starting in 1990, if you look at the trend line, so this yellow line here is a trend line, and basically what this is it's a long-term average, and basically the average is 4%. That's a 4% appreciation each year that was basically expected. And that from 1990 to the year 2000, we were pretty much on that trend line, 4% increase. So this was across the U.S., and we were increasing at a 4% average each year. And we can see what happened right about 2001, and we started going above that trend line. So we started experiencing home value increases that were quite a bit more than the average 4%. Well, and then what happened is right around 2008, we started dropping below that. And so when you look at this trend line, we actually the projected amount, was 94,000 in 1990. The projected amount is actually 343,000 for the average home price in America. And so you can see that we've been below that trend line for the past several years. It wasn't until 2021 that we actually got above the trend line. So this year, the projected amount is $378,000. So that would be actually above the trend line. And we see what started happening, back between 2001 and 2008 or 2007. We see what happened there. Right around the Great Recession, home prices started dropping significantly. What's going to happen now? Will we see those home prices drop back down, or will they continue to rise? Well, looking at this, everyone is always talking about how expensive the homes are now. So, compared to 1990, at $94,000 being the average, $347,000 in 2021 is a massive number. So it has jumped up significantly. However, if you look at the trend line, it's really not much far off than what we actually expected. Now, if you look at the annual appreciation, you notice that between the years of 1990 and 2000, we saw basically it was right around the average annual appreciation, so 4.1%. And then in 2001 to 2005, we saw that jump up, and the average was 8.26%. All right, so we saw a massive increase, way above the trend line with the annual appreciation. And then in 06, it started dropping, and we dropped way down to negative 4.15% between the years of 2006 and 2011. We started recovering after that, so between 2012 and 2019, 6.28%. And now, just the past couple years, we have seen a significant increase in the annual appreciation. If you look back between the years of 2012 to 2019, inflation was right around 2%. And so, with the inflation, typically that is also going to impact home prices as well. So it was around 2%. And you can see we were up above the 4% average, about 2%. Last year, the inflation was at 7%. And the government is basically going to look at reducing the inflation. And as we reduce inflation, home prices should come down from there. Technically, we could go another year with home prices rising. We couldn't go another 2 or 3 years. That's definitely possible. At some point, it's just going to become unaffordable for people. So are we in a bubble? Are real estate prices getting too high? A lot of buyers are concerned about going into this market and buying properties, and they're concerned that we're in this bubble and eventually the bubble is going to burst and they're going to be stuck in a negative equity situation. So they're going to basically owe more on the house than it's worth. If you look at the red flags that we saw in like 2005, 2006, a lot of the situations are just not the same. So if we look back in that time period, there are a lot of things that are not exactly the same. So number one, a lot of people were getting mortgage loans that really didn't need to be getting loans. So we had people that had bad credit. We were going off of stated income. And so we're putting ourselves in a very high risk. So a lot of people own homes that probably didn't need to be owning homes. At the time, we at the peak, we actually had about 69% of the U.S. actually owning a home. And so when you look at that, we really should be around the 64 to 66% range. When you see lenders that will start to loosen up the requirements, so they'll start to loosen up the credit requirements, they'll start to loosen up the debt to income ratio, and just loosen up these requirements, which allows more people to get into homes. They'll loosen up the percentages and that kind of thing. It can become a problem because more and more people are going to be able to get into homes. And, there's going to be situations where a lot of people, if something happens, if we have a situation that impacts our economy, a lot of these people aren't going to be able to own homes, and they're not going to be able to make the payments. And then, We saw a lot of that back in that time period, right around like 2005 when it started. Another thing that we saw back then was a lot of speculation. So we saw a lot of people buying homes and not flipping homes, just buying homes and holding the homes. And so they were buying, expecting for the home prices to go up, and then they were going to sell. We had a lot of that going on at the time. Right now, we're at about a third of that kind of speculation. We're about a third of what the peak was at that time. So we really don't have much to worry about with that. Another thing that makes this time period very different is the inventory. So back at the peak, like 2008, we had an annual month supply of 10.4 months across the U.S. In 2021, the month supply of inventory across the U.S. was actually 2.3 months. And so in the Triad, it's actually less. We see a lot of locations around the Triad that are actually about a month supply. So we're way below the average of a balanced market would be right about like 6 months supply. Part of the problem back then was that we had this massive supply of homes. And so, it's the whole thing of supply and demand. Right now, we don't have that supply, especially in our area in the Triad. It's only, a month, give or take. And so even though across America we had 6.1 million homes that were sold last year. Even though, in order to sell that many homes, you have to have 6.1 million homes to sell. So it wasn't necessarily the inventory that was a problem. What it was is how quickly the homes are being sold and how high the demand is. So the question is, why is that demand so high? So I think a lot of this has to do with the affordability of homes. So one thing that's different right now is the affordability. So if we look back in history, back in the 80s, around 1982, the mortgage rates were actually right at about 17%, which is super high. We can't, when you look at the mortgage rates now, and we're complaining about it potentially going up to 4% or more. And that's, but when you look at compared to 17%, it's really low still. So you look at the affordability, we've actually it's never been as affordable as it is now. So you look at the long-term average, and basically what this is like the percent of income, right? So the average, the trend line, the average here, long-term average is 20.3%. So it's basically 20.3% of a person's income is generally what would, go towards their house payment. Right now we're at 16% across the U.S. So affordability, it's actually, homes are really affordable right now. Even though the home prices are so high, basically what we're buying is not the actual house, it's the payment. The two factors that are going to make up affordability are the actual cost of the product, the cost of the home, and the basically the interest rate, like how much you're going to be paying on a monthly basis. So that's one thing that just has driven demand, right? So this year, we've had inflation. Inflation was 7% last year. The government's going to try to control that. So basically, the way they control it is through raising the interest rates. So when they raise the interest rates, inflation should come down. It's kind of a hard thing to get exactly right. As they raise the interest rates, inflation should come down. We really kind of want it right at about 2%. So, but just looking at the affordability of homes right now, you look at, how the interest rates impact the actual affordability of houses, they're not necessarily overpriced. They would be overpriced for first-time home buyers. All right, so for a first-time home buyer, the typical average right now is around 24%. 24% would actually go towards their mortgage, and So if we look at inflation, you can see that we've actually had a pretty big change from 1989. And you can see that the inflation for things like cars, gas, wages, and houses have went up. And you can look at these numbers, these percentages, and they're very high percentages. But if you look at the mortgage rates, we're actually below what was anticipated for inflation. Again, it's a very affordable time still for buyers. Even though the home prices are up, mortgage rates are lower than expected because of the interest rates. A couple things that make this time period different than the period of right before, the Great Recession. We're not actually seeing, if you look back in like '08, we actually had a mass, there was 40% of homes sold were actually distressed sales. So like foreclosures and short sales. Now that percentage is actually really low. It's actually 2021, it was below 1%. So we're not seeing a lot of distressed home sales. Homeowners have a lot more equity now than they did back then. We're also not seeing underwater homes the way that we did. In 2010, we actually saw a percentage of 24.7% of homes were actually underwater. Basically meaning that the homeowner actually owed more than the home was worth. We're not seeing that now. People have a lot of equity in their homes. The historical average of underwater homes was right around 6%. And we're actually below that. In Q3 of 2021, we were actually at 2.1%. So a lot of people have equity in their homes. So things are really different now than they were back then. I think the biggest thing that's different is the amount of inventory. If you look back, leading up to 2007, we actually overbuilt homes by about 2.5 million. And then the Great Recession started, we actually underbuilt. So we actually underbuilt a lot of homes, and we've been underbuilding homes for several years. So it actually took us all the way up until 2021 to get back to the point of the average. The average being about 1 million homes built across the U.S. So we've been below that number for several years. We just got back to that number in 2021, where we built about 123,000 homes more than the average. The problem is we don't have the inventory because we don't have enough homes available. And because we underbuilt for so many years, it's going to take us about 18 years. If we go at the same rate that we're going right now, it's going to take us about 18 years to get back to the level that we need to be at. So I don't think that the inventory issue is going to go away anytime soon. As long as we have this low inventory, I'm not sure that things are going to change that much. So are we in a real estate bubble? I don't think so right now. I think it could just be the tip of the iceberg. It could be a situation where home prices are going to continue going up. And I think with the inventory, I think that's the way it's looking right now. Of course, there are things that can happen. Anything can happen. Anything that's going to really make a big impact on the economy. Anything that's going to make, like we have the Ukraine crisis right now. Who knows what's going to happen with that? If that situation gets worse, it could really impact. And so I don't think we're in a bubble right now, but with that situation, it could impact us significantly, and we could see a massive change depending on what happens there. So you never really know. I personally think that we're just going to continue on for a while. I think eventually home prices will come down, but I don't see it being a situation that, we're in a bubble and that's just going to burst at any time and people are going to be, negative equity situations unless something significant happens that really changes the world. I don't know the future, but this is just my opinion. And a lot of experts kind of feel sort of the same way. They feel like it's going to continue just going in this direction. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this video gave you some insight on home prices. Make sure that you hit the subscribe and the bell to get notified for any content that we put out.